special live episode of Wrestling with the Future. I'm Angelo DeCipio, joined by the happy haberdasher, Dan, the man Sebastiano. Dan, did you miss me?
Oh, it wasn't the same without you. Take a
I'm
vacation.
telling you, went on
Only
vacation.
thing I can think of coming back to you, Angelo.
I didn't get a phone call. I didn't get a postcard. The Navy wouldn't tell me where you were. We have a hell of a show tonight, brother. We have not one, but two amazing superstars. They are really amazing people. The return of the most controversial man. They call him the most controversial. I like Vince. He's a great guy. The return of Vince Russo to Wrestling with the Future. And Vince, you are the reason for this show tonight, and you know it. And you didn't think I could pull it off, brother, but I had a little surprise for you. I knew Stephen Plym.
Yeah, no, listen, when you sent me that email that it was a go, yes, you caught me by surprise. But I gave you my word. I said, if you deliver, I'll be here, and here I am.
Yes, sir. Absolutely. And Vince is a man of his word. And the gentleman that's the ruckus of tonight's show is a man named Stephen M. Plym. The M stands for money.
Thank you.
You're welcome, Stephen. I know Steve Plym. He's a great guy. There's something else that a lot of people don't know about Steve Plym unless you're in show business. For 25 years, he was the best friend of one of the most enigmatic, entertaining, misunderstood, controversial people in show business, a gentleman named Tiny Tim. Incidentally, Steve Plym was also Tiny Tim's manager, babysitter, chef, order taker, the guy that tucked him in at night.
You ain't kidding, baby.
I heard you, Steve. Let's talk about this because, as I said, Vince Russo put out a challenge to me on the episode we did about the Beatles, Paul McCartney, and he said, and I quote, and there were many thousands of people who saw that show, and they heard Vince Russo utter these words: "If you get Tiny Tim's manager on the show, I'll talk to you for 5 hours."
Are you kidding me?
Well, he gave us an hour tonight.
Angel, let's not get panicky. 5 hours.
Oh, God.
But I say, when somebody says Tiny Tim, Mr. Plym, when somebody says Tiny Tim, I stop everything. Everything. I try to spread the Tiny Tim legend to all my listeners. I became infatuated with Tiny Tim at the age of 7 years old, and wow. I am still infatuated by Mr. Tiny Tim to this day.
Unbelievable. Way to go, and thank you.
You are welcome.
And you are here, Steve, because of Vince Russo. You really are. I wanted to
thank you. I got to thank you again, pal.
I wanted to talk to you. You and I have had a lot of conversations about Tiny and other people. But tonight we're going to focus on Tiny as a person, as the man.
You know why I like that, by the way? Angela, you know why I like that? That's why I wrote the book. 1 million people could go to a library and look up facts and figures and write a book on Tiny Tim. I didn't want to do that. My book is based on the 25 years I knew him, yes, but the 5 years he and I were together behind the scenes, what really went on. And that's the difference between my book and others that may be out there.
And the book that Steve refers to, I'm holding in my hand. It's called Tiny Tim and Mr. Plym. This is the book. And when I'm finished with it, I promise to send it to Vince Russo.
Very nice. I did read, though, Mr. Plym, I did read Tiny's autobiography, the what troubadour? What am I looking for?
That's not his autobiography. A different author wrote that, the troubadour. I forget his name.
Because he's quoted a lot in that book.
Well, I don't know the author. Oh, it's Justin Martell.
Okay.
Wrote that book a couple years ago, I think.
Yeah, it's fairly recent.
Right. And I haven't read it because I just don't want to read it. It's a very touchy thing with me because a lot of people said, well, Steve, in your book, you didn't go through all his music, his albums, his past. I said, that wasn't the purpose of my book. The
Mhm.
title of the book is Tiny Tim and Mr. Plym. It's
Right.
our story, all behind the scenes that nobody else could write about or tell except me. So that's why I wrote it. And that's the difference between whomever may write a book on Tiny Tim and my book.
Exactly. Vince, when did you first become aware of Tiny Tim?
Oh man, bro, I'll never forget it. I really won't. Rowan and Martin laughing, man.
There you go.
There was Dan Rowan and Dick Martin. Dan Rowan and Dick Martin. Dan Rowan made the big introduction, and Dan Martin stood there as Tiny came on.
Yeah.
And I'll never forget it. I think it was 68, if I'm correct.
That's right, 1968.
Yeah.
I had never seen anything like this in my life.
Nobody had.
Yes.
And I'll tell you something about that.
And nobody
Vince,
has since.
I'll tell you something about that, Vince. The man sitting just above you on my computer screen knows a lot about that because he was there.
Dan, the man was there.
No, Steve Plym.
Steve. Oh, the bottom of you. Okay, yeah.
Steve Plym. Now, Steve, this part of the story ties into George Slater. Let's talk about George Slater's involvement.
George Schlatter was the creator and executive producer of Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In.
There you go.
Which was the most unique avant-garde show of its time, 1968. And he worried, and by the way, George wrote my foreword to the book, and I thank him a million times. You know, he's a genius producer. I mean, everybody knows him, you know. And he wrote my foreword to the book, and he had to hide Tiny Tim from NBC because, as he tells me, the show was so weird and avant-garde for its time anyway. He was scared what NBC would say, man. So Digby Wolf was his name. I never met him, but he was a writer and producer, that kind of guy. Brought Tiny Tim in to George Schlatter 2 or 3 days before they were going to go on the air, and said, "You got to listen to this." And they said, "No, we're busy. We're busy." And he insisted. And Tiny comes in with his weird costumes on, and he has a shopping bag, and he pulls a ukulele out and he starts singing.
We have Stephen, we have a phone call coming in.
Oh, cool.
Caller, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Are you there, caller?
I am. I'm here. Hello?
Yeah, go ahead. Ask your question. Steve Plym and Vince Russo are here talking about Tiny Tim.
Is Mr. Plym around there?
Mr. Plym is here.
Is that Kurt Dixon?
Yes, it is, Mr. Plym. How you doing?
Hey, baby, I love you. How's Florida treating you?
It's doing well. It's doing well, Mr. Plym.
Oh, my God. Hey, you guys. This was my business partner, financial business partner with Tiny Tim back in the day. I love him. Kurt Dixon.
Don't tell the date now. That'll tell you how old I am. I'm telling you. It's been a while, hasn't it?
Kurt, you finally tracked him down to get your money back, right?
Oh, I tell you what. Every time I talk to him, I figure it's going to cost me more, you know. So, I didn't know if I should make this call or not, to tell you the truth. I was thinking about it.
Well, you're going to get a bill for it, I'll tell you that.
Oh, am I really? You know. No, I'll tell you what. That's Steve, I'll tell you. I had talked to you not too recently. You were still working on your book, weren't you, on the new book you've got coming out?
Yeah, I have a new one. I'm about halfway through, called Catch a Fallen Star. That's my new book.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, we'll talk about that in the show as well, Steve. So, Mr. Dixon, Mr. Dixon it is?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So give me a little insight into this guy, Steve Plym. I've described him in the lead up to this show as the last of the characters, the last of the great showbiz characters. The fast-talking, smooth-talking manager, agent, you know, chickie baby, let's do lunch. I'll have my people call your people. That's Steve Plym. He's the real deal, though.
Yeah,
I love this guy.
He still takes a hit of that cigarette and says, "Who loves you, baby?" You know.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Hey,
Exactly.
Curdy, I only smoke and drink on 2 occasions, when I'm alone or with somebody. That's it.
That's right.
Well, Mr. Dixon, thank you for calling in. That there's a question you have, fire away.
Well, I was just wanting to see how Steve's doing, and I go back a long ways with Steve as far as Tiny, so I really don't have a lot of questions with Tiny because we go back for all the traveling and that with Tiny and that. I pretty much.
Well,
know
I'll tell you
about
what
Tiny.
then. We have a gentleman on my show tonight who was a mainstay in the world of pro wrestling, but he's also a huge Tiny Tim fan. His name is Vince Russo. Vince, you want to ask Mr. Dixon anything about Tiny Tim? Something maybe someone doesn't know?
Well, I want Mr. Plym to finish that story first, because I don't want him to he was in the middle of that story. I want to hear the end of that story when Tiny Tim performed to the NBC executives.
Yes, absolutely, for sure.
Well, he didn't perform for the NBC executives. Okay, they hit him. In fact, they costumed him, and how they costumed Tiny, I mean, I don't even know, but they hit him because they thought, oh my God, we're going to get in trouble. But in fact, Schlatter said to me, they kind of chastised him after Tiny came on the show, unknown and all that kind of stuff. But after the ratings, NBC came and said, you were right. Let's go, baby. Let's go.
That's amazing.
Remarkable.
And, the rest is history, Rowan Martin.
Absolutely.
George Schlatter and Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In made Tiny Tim. And George is so kind. He said, we were brand new, Schlatter says, and he helped make us too. I mean, it was a perfect marriage.
Absolutely. Well, Mr. Dixon, I thank you so much for calling in. You touched base with Mr. Plym. I'll make sure that he stays in touch with you.
I sure appreciate it. Listen, thanks, Tim. Thanks for coming on the show. You have a good evening. You guys take care, and thanks for having this show. It's great.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thanks, I love you, baby.
Hey, you take.
That's good. Yeah, our first call of the night. Now,
wait, let me ask. Can I ask Mr. Plym a question? So, Mr. Plym, you were there that night of the performance, correct?
Where?
At the Rowan Martin.
Oh, no, not at all. Hell, I was 18 years old.
Okay.
I'm sorry, Steve. I thought you were there. Oh, you were at the. Wait, was it a reunion?
Well, yeah.
You and I talked about Rowan and Martin privately. Yeah. Was that a reunion show or a reunion event?
That was a reunion. That was
okay. I'm sorry, Vince. My mistake.
That was in '93, I think, when I was managing Tiny, and Mr. Schlatter called and wanted Tiny. We had every star in the world there. Schlatter did. We did it at the Lowe's Hotel in Santa Monica with NBC. We stayed there for 3 days shooting. Every star in the world was there, and Tiny was the biggest star of all.
Yeah, at 6'5", he probably was.
Oh my God! Let me digress just for a minute so we get the history right. Okay.
Sure.
In 1968, when he went on Laugh-In, right? I was 18 years old, college student, had a rock and roll band, right? And I sat at home with my parents and watched Tiny Tim, as millions of others did, and I laughed. I said, "Who is this clown? Who the hell does he think? Oh my God, right? So absurd." I laughed anyway, I admit it, just like a million other people, right? And how did I know that 3 years later, I'd book my first job with him and we became friends? It's just weird. Life is weird, isn't it?
Now, how did that happen, Steve?
Well, in 70, 71, I started my first entertainment agency. And I had a lot of bands playing in the Midwest and so forth. And I wanted to break out and I wanted to have somebody big. I'm thinking, I called Tiny Tim's agent. And I want to book Tiny Tim, and it was in Waterloo, Iowa. Get that? Waterloo, Iowa. at the Red Carpet Inn. I'll never forget it. And I was so proud. Because we watched him married with Miss Vicky on the Tonight Show. He's a giant star, right? And I booked him, and I was so proud. I took my mother, my father, my wife, and whoever else would come. We went up there, and that's the first time I met him, and watched him perform. And my God, what a show! I blew my mind. Every conception or preconception that I had went away. I mean, what an entertainer, what a singer. And the falsetto thing with Tiptoe is just a gimmick. I mean, what a baritone singer. And he sang all the songs from the 20s and 30s, and he knew all the artists. Just wonderful. And so I was his agent for that gig, right? So I went in the dressing room and we talked. And as we talked, and then I brought my mother in to introduce, and she loved him. And Tiny takes off his tie. I'll never forget it. And he signs it to my mother, to Miss Betty. She had it till the day she died 5 years ago, in a big frame. And from that point on, guys, we became friends. And then later on, I would do productions and so forth, and I would hire him to be my special guest at sports shows and so forth. We became friends, and on it went. There you go.
Amazing. Vince, in reading Stephen's book, I came across something I want you to pick up on. It says, during the years I was Tiny's personal manager, we shared a lot of ups and downs and hairpins turns that made his incredible life. And he was the most fascinating, loving, charming, honorable, hard to figure out, multi-talented, dysfunctional, and misunderstood person I've ever met. When I read that, Vince, I thought of another guy that you and I share in common, Andy Kaufman.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Oh. Absolutely.
So let's talk about what was it that Tiny just, what's the word I'm looking for? He gravitated toward or captivated people. What was it about him, Stephen or Vince, in your opinion? Vince, well, let me ask you as a fan, Vince, what was it about Tiny that drew you to him?
Just an absolute, I saw at it as an 8-year-old kid or a 7-year-old kid, actually. No, 68. No, I was 7. I saw an absolute one-of-a-kind character. A character. And that's the thing that fascinates me, Mr. Plym. It's a little like wrestling. The whole idea with writing is wrestling is you want people to watch this show and is this real? Is this guy really like this? That's the seed you have to plant.
You ain't kidding, man. You ain't kidding. He captured the imagination. They didn't know what he was.
That's exactly it. So you're watching this guy and you are so, mesmerized. And so again, it's like, is this guy for real? Like literally, does this guy walk around like this? Does this guy talk like this? I mean, so that's the appeal. I mean, off the bat, the mystique of, is this guy for real?
You are so right, because I had to find out. I had to find out. I mean, I was just driven to it. And the more we talked and the more we communicated over those early years, right? And again, I would hire him as a celebrity guest host at my sports shows, okay? And we got to know each other really well. And it wasn't the music, okay? It was the guy, the real guy. I mean, I had to know what he was. We just meshed. All I can say, I don't have another adjective or adverb to put. We just meshed, and it was a love friendship for 25 years, man.
That's remarkable. Vince, I got to tell you, there's a connection, something I want you to explore with me. Tiny Tim appeared on the WWE Raw.
Yeah.
1993.
Yeah.
It was an episode of Raw. I believe it may have been, I'm wanting to say Madison Square Garden.
You know what? Now, let me tell you something. Brain cells. We were either in New Jersey, but I know that Vince McMahon and his wife and me and Tiny ended up at the Garden for dinner. I can't remember whether it was in Jersey that we played or the Garden.
They probably were at the Manhattan Center, because that's where Raw originated from, the Manhattan Center.
Yeah,
99.9% sure that's where they were.
I think you're right, man.
Yeah.
I think you're right.
Vince, do you have any recollection of how that came about? I mean, you were with them at the time writing?
Bro,
I was his manager, and Vince McMahon called me and wanted him out of the blue, it wasn't solicited, and wanted him on the WWF wrestling. And I just went, oh my God, what? That was, to me, excuse me, but so what? Because I picked, I didn't know wrestlers or anything, right? And I'm going, all these macho, strong guys, right? And Tiny had somewhat of an image of being gay or effeminate. And how's he going to mix with these guys? And Vince told me, fine. And he put us up at the Plaza Hotel. We went in, we did a great show. And let me tell you something. What a wonderful reception. I worried about nothing. Every one of these wrestlers were so kind to him and so helpful. I couldn't believe it, man. It was like a homecoming, like they knew him all his life. I was so happy.
Vince, talk to me about your knowledge or involvement or participation. You were writing the magazine or writing the show at the time?
I wasn't there yet, bro. You kidding me? I never got to meet the man. I wasn't there yet. I saw it play out on television, but I was not working for them yet.
Oh, I thought you came aboard as a writer around then, maybe 93, 94.
94, I realized.
Oh, 94.
So that was before I was even there, yeah.
Oh, I got you.
Man, because you bring up Andy Kaufman, if you remember on Raw, Jerry Lawler interviewed Tiny Tim. So, Lawler was the connection there with Andy Kaufman. And I'm sure, knowing Jerry Lawler, man, I'm sure he must have been a huge fan of Tiny Tim. Jerry Lawler loves that stuff.
He was.
And I'll tell you something else, straight shoot. I knew Andy Kaufman.
Oh, I didn't. Okay.
Yeah.
I've
talked about it on the show many times, right, Dan?
Oh yeah.
Dan, you've been very quiet tonight.
Well, I
shut up and speak.
Look at all these excellent voices. I was actually hoping to expand on a question Vince asked. You talked about the character and building characters. Yeah, there's an old saying in wrestling that the best characters are yourself turned up to 11. I was wondering if you could maybe go into more detail about where the line blurred between what we see on TV and Tiny Tim behind the scenes.
Boy, that's a loaded question.
Is that for me or?
Yes, sir.
Oh, I'm sorry. Well, Tiny Tim, guys, the eccentric, bizarre, and all that, we all know that. But he was a real dichotomy, okay? In another way, okay? His sexual appetite was unbelievable, beyond description, okay? It's in my book, and I could have wrote 3 books just on that, okay?
Yeah, he's not kidding.
And then his religious and spiritual thing, man, you guys, and I write that in the book, was unbelievable. I couldn't believe, like 4 or 5 times a day, guys, he would have to go to his room or wherever and meditate and pray. I mean, I don't care what was going on. If it interfered with an interview or what, he had to do it, okay? However, on the other side of Tiny, he loved the girls, and the younger, the better. And that almost got him in a lot of trouble, and he didn't know the difference. See, this guy was from Mars, man. I mean, I don't even know, okay? But he just loved women. His sexual situation was, Mr. Plym, I don't know how you men do it. I can last maybe 5 minutes, maybe. How do you do it for an hour or all night? I don't understand it. And then he would have a situation with a woman, right? And come to me or call me at 4 o'clock in the morning, okay? And beg forgiveness. No, I'm serious. Let me give you an example, guys. You're gonna shit your pants on this one, okay? I had a birthday party for him. It's April 12th, and I always would have a birthday party, no matter where, right? We happened to be in Des Moines at the time, so it was convenient. I had everybody come over to my home, maybe 60 people, dinner party, the whole thing. And Tiny would sit in this we called it Tiny's chair, a white leather chair that I bought just for him because he loved it. And he'd sing to everybody. And it was his birthday, right? So he's opening gifts. He opens my gift. It was a joke, okay? I bought him a blow-up doll. A urethane blow-up doll for a joke, right? He opens it up. He goes, "Oh my God, Mr. Plym, this is wonderful. Oh my," and he just went crazy, right? It's a joke. He didn't get it that it was a joke. He thinks this is like real or something. Follow me? Now watch this. P.S. The party's over, 4 o'clock in the morning. My phone rings, right? I'm asleep, half drunk, asleep. And it's TT. And he goes, "Mr. Plym, I want to tell you, I can't thank you enough for the urethane doll, the beautiful doll. Oh my God, what a gift. Oh, I blew it up, and Mr. Plym, I had sex with it in every orifice that it had on it. It was wonderful. I've never had such great sex because there was no complaining. There was no talking. It was just wonderful. And then I realized how I had sinned. Mr. Plym, I sinned. I took the scissors out. I cut it up. I chopped it out in little pieces. I threw it out my hotel room." Click.
Oh my God.
I swear to God, you can't make this shit up like you said.
Yeah.
You
Bro,
can't make this shit up.
You saw, Mr. Plym, I'm a very big Howard Stern fan, and the Tiny interviews were the best far and away. And everything you're saying, you could see that through the interviews. He was being him during the interviews, and he gave you a little insight, and you could see, I think this person you're talking about came out, because I would guess Mr. Plym too, he had a little bit of a drinking problem.
Yes, he did.
He liked his alcohol, didn't he?
Yeah. And the thing is, it's not drinking like most people do. Okay, look, Bush beer was his favorite. Bush beer. I would buy him a case at a time. He's a germophobic. He had to have a can wiped off, a straw out of a cellophane, right? And he put it in, and he drank beer out of the straw. 12, 14, 24 cans at a time while he's singing to my friends. And, and then he gets loaded as hell, right? And laugh all the time. And as people laughed at him, he laughed at himself. He was just a good guy, man. He was a good soul. But yeah, Howard Stern loved him.
Oh, and yeah, they had great chemistry.
Many times. Many times.
Great chemistry.
The only time Stern and I had a problem, okay, was I was talking about doing a movie, right? Tiny Tim movie based on my book, right? And I put out there, and I told because everybody said, who could play Tiny Tim? I said, well, Howard Stern. And he went, what? I said, well, look, you got the New York mentality. You've interviewed him. You know him. You got the long curly hair. You got the nose. You could play Tiny Tim. He took big offense at that. Giant offense. Oh, God,
Mr. Plym, that's a great thing that you bring up, because I know there was like for about 5 minutes, I know there was like a Broadway play about Tiny for very, very brief. That is the one guy that I think there should be a movie on. Like, why has that never happened?
Oh, it's my fault, I guess. I went for it for a while and failed. And then other things, life takes over, and children and so forth. I'd still like to do it, of course. But no, I failed at doing that. And I really hate myself for that, because I believe it would be a wonderful movie. It would draw in not only the baby boomers, of course, but it would be a crossover to today's people, and they'd see what it was like then. And Tiny can relate to so many people on so many levels, especially today.
Is it too late for you to go forward with that?
No, not at all. I'd love to. And I'm admitting to you, I dropped the ball. Okay. And hey, anybody out there wants to talk, I'd love to do a movie based on Tiny Tim and Mr. Plym. I think it would be a hoot. Okay. So if any got any ideas, here I am.
Vince, it's all you. Go ahead, brother.
Mr. Plym, were you there at the end for Tiny?
Yeah, we went, again, friends for 25 years, and in and out of all kinds of different deals and shows and so forth. The last 5 years of his life, that's when I took over management, because everybody screwed him over. Everybody, agents, managers, screwed him, abused him, right? And he's going down the tubes. He's playing for shit money. And I said, okay, look, we're in a limo one day. I said, look, okay, I'll do it. Let's. He said, seriously? I said, come on, man, let's go. And I resurrected his career, and I'll tell you how. And it was very simple. But guys, everybody laughed at me. I had the last laugh, and so did Tiny. But check this out. We couldn't get a hit record again. His career was going downhill. He was playing in shitholes for no money. He wasn't on national TV anymore, okay? He was depressed and sad, but he kept it up. He kept going. You know, he's a worker. And I said, he's still in Manhattan, right? And I'd lived all across the country, but I had moved back to Des Moines at the time. And I said, I called him one day. I said, Tiny, well, no, it was in the limo. We were talking. I said, Tiny, I'll manage you. Here's what we're going to do. Better than a hit record. We're going to move you to Des Moines, Iowa. And I'm going to put press releases out to the world that you, Tiny Tim, the most eccentric, bizarre entertainer of our time from New York City, is moving to Des Moines, Iowa? Are you nuts? People will go crazy. They'll come out of the woodwork, I promise you. He didn't hesitate. Mr. Plym, if you say so, I'm with it. However, my own family, all my friends, my peer group, they said, you are absolutely out of your effing mind. What are you doing? Well, guess what? It worked like a charm. Lena was back. We had Larry King. Everybody called. All the networks called. Every show called. You know why? They couldn't believe it. So I got that platform back of national exposure, see, just by moving him to Des Moines. And I had TV crews walking and following him all over the city, right? And it made national news everywhere, worldwide news, right? So now the engagements start pouring in, right? Because he's on the news, he's, you know, and he's on Leno again. He's with Larry King on the 50th anniversary of Larry King. I mean, he was back on top, and he looked at me one day and he says, Mr. Plym, you're wonderful.
There's a woman involved in this that we must acknowledge, Steve, and you and I spoke about her privately. It's a young woman named Miss Sue.
Yes.
Without whom Tiny, and quite frankly yourself as well, without you and Tiny, I mean, without you and Miss Sue, Tiny would probably have been broke, drunk, destitute, at the mercy of slimeball promoters that would use his once great fame for their own benefit. Talk to
they're
me
all dogs.
About
they're dogs.
Talk to me about the hidden gem called Miss Sue.
Okay, I called Miss Sue Tiny's 401k. You get it?
Yeah.
Because she was loaded. She came from a very, very wealthy family. I mean, tons of dough. And I'll never forget it. It was Tiny's birthday on April 12th. And I have a house full of people, like usual. And Tiny's late. Finally, he calls me. Mr. Plym, I'm running late, but it's going to be okay. You have no idea who I met. I met this wonderful girl. Her name is Miss Sue. And he'd whisper, because I could tell that she was listening. He'd go, Mr. Plym, she drives a gold Mercedes. A gold Mercedes, Mr. Plym. He says, you have no idea how much money she has. He says, I'm late, but do you mind if I bring her to my birthday party? I know you haven't met her, but do you mind? I said, for Christ's sake, just get here. Everybody's here. We'll meet Miss Sue. Right? They show up. She's weirder than weird. She's wearing a mask before Michael Jackson did. Okay. And with a cane. She had every malady, she said, in the world. And all she did is talk about her sicknesses. The most boring person I've ever met in my life, practically. And I take Tiny in the bathroom and go, what the hell are you doing? He goes, Mr. Plym, I think I'm in love. I said, I know you're in love. You're in love with her checkbook. Oh, and you know, it's the wink in the eye that only he and I knew.
Yeah.
And I would press him on it, and I go, you know, that's what it is. And he go, oh no, Mr. Plym. Oh, it's not that. Well, we both knew it was. But yeah, she was loaded, and he knew, and he was sick and getting older. He was diabetic. He'd never go to a damn doctor. Okay. And he knew that this was his way out where he could live nicely.
Yeah.
And not have to perform very much. And the irony is, he died on stage November 30th, 1996, singing for her and her mother's hoity-toity friends in Minneapolis, singing Tiptoe and Croaked right there. And the irony of that is, he and I used to laugh and joke all the time on planes and talking. You know, I go, Tiny, you know, you're going to die singing a medley of your hit. A medley of your hit.
Yeah.
And he goes, you think so, Mr. Plym? I said, I know. And that's exactly what happened. Isn't that weird?
Yeah.
What can you say? But that's what happened.
It's all you, brother.
Who, me?
All you,
Vince.
Vince. Vince. No, I want Vince to have at it. This is I promised Vince. This is Vince.
The man.
Yeah, well, Mr. Plym, I know because he was talking about it on Stern. You know, I mean, I think his last appearance on Stern was like literally maybe 8 months before he passed away. He was having heart problems.
I mean, he had a heart attack.
Yeah, he was talking about that on Stern, and you could see he was very, very, very concerned about that.
And the thing is, though, you know, Tiny would talk about that all the time for years. I'm going to die here. I'm going to die there. I'll never see another flower bloom. You know, he's always into that death thing, right? And I'll be in heaven with the Lord, and everything will be okay. So after a while, you didn't even really listen to it because he talked about that all the time. But then in Boston, he had that major heart attack, and not soon after, and he said, I'm not going to live. I think his quote was, I won't be alive for 6 months, and he wasn't. He died.
Yeah. Now, Mr. Plym, were you around him, or was this a little bit before your time? You might have been around him during this time. I'll never forget growing up, New York, you know, of course, we're fans of the same thing. And somebody who was red hot at the time was Morton Downey Jr.
Oh, God, yeah.
And Tiny went on there and kind of got railroaded by Morton Downey Jr. because that was Morton Downey's shtick. You know what I'm saying? And I mean, to railroad like Tiny Tim of all people, like it's like railroading, you know, St. Patrick, for crying out loud. Yeah. But he railroaded him, and he started, you know, grilling him about like abusing Miss Vicky, because I know, you know, that was the story that she was telling. And I mean, out of nowhere, Morton Downey Jr. just kind of was drilling him and drilling him and drilling him. And the one thing I'll never forget about that interview was, you know, Tiny just answering every question, regardless of how rude Morton Downey was being to him, just to basically, you know, not only number one, clear his name, but in many interviews with him, even on Stern, man, he always wanted to set the story straight, because there was a lot of shit talked about him. And, you know, he never danced around anything. He always seemed to want to set the story straight.
You're so exactly right. Exactly.
Yeah. But that interview with Miss Vicky, listen, I don't know what happened behind the scenes. I wasn't there, but that topic really seemed to affect him greatly. They did not, I know they had a daughter out of it, Tulip, but they did not have a good relationship following the divorce, did they?
No, they didn't. In fact, you know, Tiny was not, and listen, when he told me to write the book, if he passed, he says, tell the whole truth, hold nothing back. And I haven't, okay? Tiny was not a good father, and he admits it, okay? He didn't really like children. Even my son, right, and he was around me a lot, he'd be very polite and everything, but we'd have conversations, and he would say, Mr. Plym, it's hard for me to be around children. And I'd say, why? And here was his answer. Check this out. He goes, they know too much.
Mm.
Can you dig that?
Yeah.
And you can read that in a million ways. I said, really? He said, they know too much. He was not a good father, and he wasn't good around children. He'd be polite and everything, but it wasn't his bag, that's for sure.
Did he mend the relationship with his daughter before he died, or not really?
Not to my knowledge. Not to my knowledge. Miss Vicky, okay, and that was the most famous, you know, they had 45 million viewers for the wedding on The Tonight Show. And now check this out. When Carson left, the night he left, you'd think that would be the biggest, right? He had something like 37 or 38 million viewers. Nobody ever to this day has topped Tiny Tim's ratings on The Tonight Show. Can you dig it?
Nope. That's crazy, man.
Isn't that crazy?
True.
Yeah, and that's a fact.
Mr. Plym, did he just seemed like, gosh, bro, he just seemed like underneath it all, there was kind of a lost soul, a guy that was really misunderstood, a guy that, you know, was kind of a loner. I'm just curious, did he suffer a lot with depression?
What you just said, those two words, you couldn't have said better. Lost soul. He was, okay? He loved people. He loved life. And he was as honest as you can possibly be. And like you were referring to earlier, he would go on and on as like downing or somebody is insulting him. He wanted to set the record straight, you know? He's just a good guy, right? Do you know how many times, guys, okay, when I was managing him, okay, we'd go here or there, wherever it was, Vegas, whatever, and wherever we're going to be, you know, I'd get a million calls. Can I interview? Can I interview him? Can I interview him, right? So I'd pick and choose. You can't do them all, right? And when the reporter, the press got there, they're all nice and kind and complimentary, okay? Until the red light went on. And then they wanted to make a story, okay? That's why Tiny hated the press. He hated the press. He couldn't stand them because he knew every time he got in front of that camera, no matter how nice they were before the red light went on, they gotta want to go, are you queer? Are you gay? Who did you do this to? What? I mean, I can't remember a nice interview.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? And you know how many times I had to do this? And I did. And I saw it coming. They're all nice. They think you can't see through them, right?
Yeah.
And they'd start out very nice, and then they go for the kill. You know, I'm going to make a story. I'm going to make a name for myself, right? And I would just stop the interview, and I go, fuck you. Done. Over. Get the fuck out. That's what I do.
Yeah.
Just fuck them. You know, sorry for the language, but these guys tried to bastardize him, right? And he was used to taking it and going on and on. I stopped it. No more.
Man, Steve, I have a question. I'm sorry, Vince. I just want to jump in real quick. Steve, I got a question. What do we know about the way Tiny grew up? What kind of kid was he?
Oh God.
Do we know anything
I wasn't
about his? Because I'll be honest with you, I can find very little, you know, to support his childhood. You know, it's from the time he was an entertainer on, pretty much.
Yeah. Angelo, the only thing I can tell you, and I did write some of this in my book, is what he told me, because obviously I wasn't there. But he was a very silent kid, Brooklyn, New York, stayed at home, listening to old LPs from the 20s and 30s.
Yeah.
Okay? And growing his hair long when everybody had a crew cut, right? And that kind of thing. So he had no friends. He stayed in his mom and dad's house, and the mother was domineering and tried to tell him and the father was sympathetic to him. Let the boy go. Let the boy do what he wants to do. Okay.
Yeah.
The thing then that took him over, beside his music that he loved, right, and just listening, he's hours a day listening to old LPs, you know, big sports fan, Brooklyn Dodgers and all that. He knew, he was an encyclopedia, guys. Yeah, you probably already know that. Encyclopedia of who's who in baseball. Averages, names, where they came from, how much money they made, their batting average. I mean, God, he'd blow people's minds, right? So that was what he did, as he told me when he was growing up. And he'd say all the other little boys laughed at me because I was different. And he had a hard childhood, guys. He had a hard childhood.
It sounds like it. I'm sorry, Vince, to interrupt you. Go ahead.
I forgot what I was going to ask now, Angelo.
I'm sorry. I'll tell you what, Stephen, you just mentioned something that Vince could pick up on. You talk about, growing up around the other boys. Tiny did talk about his boy experience. Vince, do you know that story?
Yeah, I got to tell you again, man. I can't. I got the book is right outside my office. The Troubadour book, man. That was something that the author of the book really got into, and not in a derogatory, bad way. I mean, this guy was not at all, mean to Tiny, like at all. If he was, I wouldn't have read the book. I could tell you right now. Good. But yeah, he talks about that one experience Tiny had where he had feelings towards another guy, and it like really, really haunted him, and it really, really affected his life. I was fascinated by reading that part of the story.
Yeah, and Tiny told me that story one time, and I'll never forget it. I picked him up after a gig. We went to a hotel. It was snowing like hell, and it was like 3 a.m, and we were sitting in front of the hotel till 7 or 8 o'clock the next morning. He was so sad and sickened by this. I don't know the proper word, but he was like questioning himself, and he told me all about it. He says he's never told anybody else and all that kind of thing, and we went back and forth. And then, surprisingly enough, and Vince, you probably know, he let it out. Howard Stern got it out of him on the show live.
Yeah.
And then after the show, Tiny hated himself for giving it up. But see, he can't lie. Stern knows how to direct an interview.
Well, Mr. Plum, let me ask you this. Knowing him as closely as you did and being a good friend, like, why do you think that haunted him so?
Because of his spirituality and reading the Bible verse by verse all the time. Wow. And that's against God's law.
Yeah, because it devastated him.
Oh, it killed him. I mean, that was his biggest cross to bear, I guess, in all the years I known him. And he didn't tell me that till like way later, as I was managing him, But then he lets it out on the Stern show, but Stern just kept pressing and pressing, not in a mean way. Stern knew how to get through to Tiny Tim. He did.
Yeah.
And finally, Tiny admitted it on the air, and man, it killed him afterward.
Man, if you remember on the Stern show, I'll never forget one of the moments where, they had a good relationship and they had a good chemistry and they both respected each other very much. And you knew Howard was a Stern growing up. And, of course, Tiny with Mr. Stern and Miss Robin and all that stuff. Yeah. But there was one episode, and I'm sure you know what I'm talking about, Mr. Plym, where Stern was kind of like poking and making fun of God. And Tiny went off the rails, like
off the fucking rail.
Dead serious. His tone changed, the show changed, and I knew right then and there, bro, this is not shtick. Like, that's serious stuff to him.
You're so right, because you can do anything with Tiny, like we've discussed, and he'll go on and on with you, except for that.
Yeah.
Except for the good
He
Lord.
was such a dichotomy, Stephen. He was
I know.
He was absolutely devout. That's been known for a long, long time. What's also been known for ages and ages, and anybody who knows Tiny Tim, he was also a walking horn dog.
Oh God, yeah.
You know,
and he admitted it, and that was like you said, Angelo. Dichotomy is the word. Horn dog, horny, has to have it, but yet is sorry after he does it and goes and prays forever. Let me tell you a story, guys.
Before you tell your story, I have to ask you a question.
Sure.
There's a guy in your book. I've got to ask you, Stephen, about Mr. Vincenti.
I knew that was coming.
Talk to me about Mr. Vincenti.
Okay, and
a paisan, Vin.
Yeah, I know. And can I tell you something? I used a different name so I didn't get sued. Okay.
There you go.
But he was Italian. No offense.
I take none. I'm good.
Good.
What are you going to tell me? Tiny had mob connections now? Is that what you're going to tell me?
Oh, a lot of them tried to come into his life, but no, this was at a club. Long story short, it was at a club. And, Tiny was a horn dog. And there were these two beautiful twins that worked at the club. And I mean, on the scale of 1 to 10, they were a 20. Okay. Really hot. Okay. And they were making overtures to Tiny and stuff. And Tiny's flirting and he's all excited. And he'd come to me after a show. Wow, I think these wonderful women love me. Oh my God, what am I going to do? Anyway, the night progresses and they come to him and they say, we're both going to do you tonight. Both of us.
Jesus.
At the same time. Tiny flips out. He comes to me and goes, Mr. Plym. Now he's freaking. He goes, I can only last 5 minutes, maybe. What am I going to do? Oh my, and he flipped out, man. I mean, the cat flipped out. And Vincenti comes over to me, AKA Vincenti. He says, I know how to take care of a star. Yeah, I'll take care of you. I want you to come back here, run around. Tiny comes to me, we can't do this. And he's really flipped out like he's not even going to do the next show. And I said, okay, I got an idea. And I knew the band that was backing him up at the time. The drummer had a big trunk, and it was called Box of Tricks. It was written right on it. It was sex toys. Okay. And I had an idea. I had to, because you don't know how flipped out he was. I didn't even know if he was going to go on and do the next show. That's how flipped out he got over this, right?
Wow.
I said, Tiny, I got an idea. I went upstairs. I got the drummer, right? And I found this great big dildo.
Oh, my God.
No, listen, guys. We've all seen them. And the nice thing is, this was still in the case, not touched.
Oh, dear God.
And you know what it said on it? The Destroyer.
Oh, man.
Oh, my God.
I said, okay. And my producer mind went, okay, click, click, click. Okay, here's what we're going to do. I mean, like in 30 seconds, I bring Tiny and I go, here's what's going to happen. See this? Oh, my goodness. I said, okay, I want you to go put on those white cloth pants, cotton pants, those thin ones. Because I knew, when the light came down, right? They're right on him, right? And they're very thin. So I said, I want you to put this and tape it, not to your underwear, because he didn't wear underwear. It was Depends, right? So I said, I want you to tape this solidly to your your inner thighs, right? And your Depends, and let it hang down. He's going, what? I said, just trust me. You won't have to worry about him. Okay, Mr. Plym, whatever you say, right? So he did it, right? He's on stage. The spotlight comes on. He's playing Great Balls of Fire by Jerry Lee Lewis. Okay? That was the opening song.
Oh, geez.
And here's this Destroyer dildo hanging down almost to his knees, what everybody could see. And the crowd went crazy. They went nuts. People are screaming, laughing, blah, blah, blah. Guess what these two broads were doing? No way. They freaked out. One of them I watched was carrying, like the tray of food and shit. She dropped it, right? They went to Mr. Vincenti. They said, "Are you out of your mind? Ain't no way." Ba 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 ba. That's what Tiny. Oh, and by the way, the kicker is he's singing the song "Great Balls of Fire," and the dildo falls out of his Depends, slides down his leg, and onto the stage.
Oh.
I'll never forget it. Like, Angelo, I love what you say in a lot of your bylines. You can't make this shit up.
You can't. You really can't.
Jesus.
It's
anyway, that got him out
book.
of.
I encourage everybody. The book is Tiny Tim and Mr. Plym. Vince, I promise you will have this book sitting next to the Troubadour very shortly.
I appreciate that, and I got to have Mr. Plym. I got to have you on one of my shows because we've only scratched the surface here.
Oh God, yeah. Well, Vin,
you don't mind
have to go away.
Can Angelo give me all your information? Is that cool?
Yeah,
yes, sir.
I want to say this too, because I'm going to recommend something else with that book because Mr. Plym said this earlier in the interview. Man, Mr. Plym, a couple of years ago on Record Store Day, they came out with a live, I think it was Rhino, but they came out with a live Tiny Tim album. Okay? Yeah. A double album. Double album was Tiny Tim live a couple of years ago. When you talk about that voice, yeah. Bro, my wife, I've been married for 36 years. Tiny Tim has been a part of my life for as long as I've been married. I was playing the album on my stereo. My wife didn't even know it was him.
I believe you.
He's singing in regular voice, and holy shit, I was blown away by what a phenomenal singer he was, and nobody saw that had to drive him nuts.
Oh, yeah, you had to be at a show. Like you're saying, he was unbelievable singer, baritone singer, man.
Oh, my God, bro, unbelievable singer.
Yeah.
Whose idea was it, Steven, for Tiny to record Do You Think I'm Sexy?
The
Rod Stewart song.
I don't know. I always answer truthfully.
I've heard it.
I
Go
don't
on
know.
YouTube and just search Tiny Tim sings Do You Think I'm Sexy. It is a trip. It is a trip. Vince, can you hang out with us or do you have to go, brother?
I do have to go just because I got another podcast to do.
Okay. I sincerely thank you, man, for
no, I thank you, Angelo, for having me. Dan and Mr. Plym. I mean, I definitely want to bring you on my show. There's so many more avenues I want to go down. I knew an hour wouldn't be long enough.
Vince, thank you so much for the invite, and I'll be there anytime you like.
Okay, thank you.
Angelo, good.
Thank you.
I'll send all Steve's stuff to you, Ben.
Okay, thank you guys very, very much for having me.
Thank you.
So this being on the show with you, sir.
Yeah, Mr. Plym, this was an absolute treat for me. Thank you very much.
Me too, to meet you, Vince. Thank you.
Okay.
Good night, Vince. Vince Russo, everybody. All right, Dan, we're back. Back with Stephen Plym, Dan the Man, and this little wop from Jersey.
Dan the Man. Dan, by the way, I got to tell you, I love your hat, baby.
Oh, thank you, sir.
He wears a different one every show.
I used to wear those years ago. I love that. I love that look.
Well, I mean, I have the mutton chops and a flat cap, so I'm nothing but with the times. That's for sure.
Absolutely. Steven, how you doing, brother?
I'm doing good, man. You know, little problem I told you off camera. My 17-year-old daughter has the COVID.
Yeah.
And that's not good, but she's a strong kid. I talked to her right before. Her name's Callie Reno Plym. She's listening right now.
Terrific.
And she's fighting, and she's going to be okay. God bless.
Absolutely beautiful. Well, I'll tell you what. I wanted Vince Russo on the show. He asked me. He's the reason. Basically, Vince is the reason that I had you on. And I'll tell you why. He's a huge Tiny Tim fan.
I can tell that. Man, that's
great.
Oh,
God, yeah. Huge Tiny Tim fan. And when we talked, I said, you know, I said, I know somebody. And I didn't tell him who. I didn't tip my hat. You know, you never, all good promoter never tips his hat. So unless you're Dan, then you have a lot of hats to tip. But here you go. Here comes another one. There you go. Hot Dan.
Oh, man.
So I didn't tell Vince. I said, if I can get somebody who knew Tiny Tim, will you come on the show and you can have at it? You can ask them anything you want. He said, if you get somebody who knew Tiny Tim, I'll stay and I'll show you the clip. He goes, I'll talk for 5 hours about Tiny Tim.
Wow.
And then when I confronted him on it, he says, I'll give you an hour. So
you
anyway,
know what blows my mind, though? Since he was 7 or 8 years old. Can you imagine that?
Oh, God, you kidding me? Please. And I'm a couple years older than Vince. I'm like 2.5. I'm like 3 years older than Vince. But I remember, oh my God, I used to love Rowan and Martin's Laughing.
So did I.
I loved, you know, and I watched. See, these shows aren't around anymore, Steven. These variety shows, even like Dan, you know, were he not the smartest guy in the room, would never know about Mike Douglas and Merv Griffin.
Oh, God.
Oh, my, please, you know.
The best.
These guys, they were entertainment. If you were on the Mike Douglas show, and you know, seen by 15, 20 million people at a time, your stardom was instantaneously guaranteed. It was like doing a shot with Johnny.
You only had 3 stations. You only had 3 stations, really.
Yeah, exactly, Steven. You had ABC, NBC, CBS. That was it. That was it. You know, see, Dan, back in the day, the talk shows were where you became famous.
Exactly.
You know, and then, because people don't understand this too, Steven, that the late night talk shows is a fairly new thing at that point in time.
Yes. Yeah.
You had, you know, Carson, of course, but it was Jack Parr before Johnny Carson.
And Steve Allen.
And Steve Allen, and a lot of people don't know that.
Yeah.
You know, and
Joe Franklin, my friend Joe Franklin, God bless his soul, started it all in New York City.
Brother, I got news for you. I'm going to tell you something I never told you. People that watch this show, they know. I worked for Joe Franklin.
You did?
I did.
Do you know
I was his associate producer.
Do you know Spats White or Ornstein?
Richie.
Yeah.
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 Wow. I didn't know that, man. That's great. Great history.
Yeah, I'll tell you what. Joe Franklin was Mr. New York. You know, it's funny. I had a guy on my show. He's a wrestling guy that knew Joe. Joe was a big wrestling fan, you know.
Yeah. Big
wrestling fan. And I had a guy on my show. Dan knows what I'm talking about. Bill Apter. And Bill Apter was a good friend of Joe Franklin. And Joe used to have me call people and prank call them. Because I used to do an impression of Joe Franklin.
Really?
I did. I used to call people.
Can you do it for us? I mean, he was great.
Yeah. I used to call people and go, hello, my friend. This is Joe Franklin. Let me speak to my friend, my dear friend, Tom Snyder. And I would get Tom Snyder on the phone and I'd prank him. Oh, yeah. I would do that with people. I'd get like, you know, I would get, here's one, like you call an upcoming guest. Call them at the hotel and tell them their appearance has been canceled till tomorrow. And they have to spend another night at the hotel.
You're a killer.
Oh, you know, bro. I'm telling you.
Franklin, man.
Dan, this is the Steve Plym is the last of the old time. I'm saying the old time managers, agents. You know, you are a dying breed, brother. You know, guys. They don't look like you. They don't sound like you. They certainly don't have your work ethic. You know, that's the biggest thing missing now in entertainment management.
I guess they call me an anachronism, something from the past still living today.
Well, if I may, just from reading. Obviously, Angelo mentioned I'm only 37, so a lot of this was before my time, and my study of history is really where it all came from. You talked about the old shows. I mean, even as a kid, I loved watching the old tapes, the Red Skelton and Ed Sullivan, and those even more than what was on TV now or then. I mean, but I think one of the things I've got the impression from studying up on you before the show is that's gone from current music is there's no brand loyalty. You were not just a manager, you were a friend. And now you hear stories, even high-end managers who are respected in the business go through clients like they change socks. And once you can't get anything, I mean, you were telling us a story sitting in a limo with a drunk, beaten down, broken man. And there's not a manager working today that would have stuck by him in that. He would have been yesterday's news and move on to the next object. And you couldn't. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, sorry for interrupting. You're exactly right, and sadly to say, because it ain't the same today, baby. All they care about is the broads and the dough.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And there are no morals. There's no real friendship at all. It's just, hey, baby, how you doing?
Yeah.
Where's my check? Where's my check?
Yeah. Well, Stephen, one of the things that was different with you with Tiny is that you handled one client at a time back then. You handled Tiny, and that's who got your attention, and that's who got your dedication and your time. Mm-hmm. Now you got guys that are handling 8, 9, rotating a revolving door. A revolving Rolodex of clients, 8, 9 people, and they can't give 5 minutes to any one.
No, they can't. But, on the other side, I must say this. So many of the entertainers today, they don't give a shit either. How much money can I make? Where am I at? They have no loyalty either.
Well, you see that with in the social media age, especially with digital music, where musicians with net worths upwards of 10, 20 million complaining that the music industry is just not fair anymore. Like, millionaires bitching like they can't make any money in the music industry.
Spoiled brats.
Right.
Exactly.
And they think they paid their dues. No, they didn't. Not like we did in the old days. You know what I mean?
Yep.
Yeah.
There was loyalty. There was friendship. There was camaraderie. Everybody had dinner together. Everybody knew each other's family.
Yeah.
You didn't leave.
Absolutely.
That'd be like screwing over your own sister. So you stayed together. Did you have fights and problems? Yes, but you stayed together.
Well, I think what jumps out at me the most with the evolution of the music industry is how many record labels and managers and whatnot manage competing and rival acts, people who they'll counter almost conflict of interest production, where bands, like if you book one band, you can't book the other ever again. I mean, the manager doesn't care. He makes money no matter who wins that battle. But exactly. Obviously there was no rival for Tiny Tim back then, but you wouldn't in no way have ever managed somebody that would make him look bad by booking them as well.
No, not at all. And so many agents and managers today, they play the game. They all want certain names on their roster, and they call their clients. And if you buy this one and this one at this price, I'll give you this one. It's like extortion.
I got news for you, Stephen. It happened, and Dan will tell you, brother, it happens the same way in wrestling as well. Exactly the same way in wrestling. You sell your soul to the highest bidder. It doesn't matter how, forget loyalty, Yeah. How many zeros are in the end of my contract? That's all.
Exactly. And I got to digress just a minute, Angelo, on the Joe Franklin thing that you were talking about, because he was such a great man. Here, I'll never forget this. As many times, now watch this, as many times like I would have to call Joe about something, you know what he would always say? The first thing that he would say to me, I was just thinking about you. You were on the tip of my tongue. I swear to God, I was just thinking about it. So if you knew him, you knew he always said that. and he made people feel good. I said, really? You go, yep, I was just thinking about you. How are you? How's the kids?
That's a guy who knows the game. But
you ain't kidding.
That made him endearing to people. It doesn't matter if he met you for 5 minutes or knew you for 20, 30 years. It didn't matter. He was the same with a stranger as he was with a guy who he knew his entire career.
Right. And he used to tell me too. He says, I used to ride around in Manhattan for hours with Tiny Tim in a limo, just talking about music.
Yeah.
Just talking about music and artists and life. He loved Tiny.
Oh yeah, he did too.
He was a great man.
In fact, I sent you. I actually sent you a clip of Tiny on the Joe Franklin show.
I got it.
You got it on your Facebook?
Yeah, and thank you very much.
You're quite welcome. And
I hadn't seen that.
But here's the thing. I got a question. I'm going to switch gears for a second. I got a question about something that we touched on with Vince Russo when Vince was here. Tiny was. You called him a lost soul. And I have a feeling, though, that lost soul didn't just appear. I have a feeling he's a guy that was, for a long time, trying to find who he is and who he was or who he wanted to be. Who was it that gave Tiny Tim, or I should say Herbert Corey, the shot in the ass, if you will, to step out of his shell and even go for something like performing on a stage? Because at first glance, Stephen, a guy like Tiny Tim, he is the most unlikely guy to succeed at anything.
That's why he succeeded. Because he was the most unlikely guy to succeed. He was an anomaly. There was no one like him. I mean, before Kiss and all these other groups had makeup on stage, Tiny did it. Okay?
Yeah.
Tiny was real from the get-go. Completely, totally honest. Could laugh at himself, even if he didn't get the joke.
Yeah.
He was just, but the lost soul thing, okay. And Vince said that, but I agree with that because he hurt a lot. One time, laughing in the car, Mr. Plym, thank you for being with me. This is my 102nd comeback. I'll tell you one thing, though, that made his day, okay? Because I'll never forget this. He signed with Reprise Records. Sinatra owned that.
Yeah.
And Tiny was a big fan, that, guys, of all the crooners.
Oh, God, sure.
That was his thing. And especially Sinatra and Bing Crosby, right?
He had a thing, too, Stephen, for Rudy Valley. What was that? Oh,
God. Rudy Valley. I'll never forget this. Rudy Valley's wife, we were at the Hollywood Roosevelt Hotel, where the first Oscars were
sure.
And we were there, and she brought Tiny his coat for him. And Tiny cried.
Wow.
Right. And we were in the Hollywood Roosevelt Hotel where the first Oscars were performed, with all the pictures around, and we're standing there. I got chills. I got chills, man.
That's wild.
But I was going to say, one of the biggest highlights, because he was telling me one time when he signed to Reprise Records, Sinatra owned it. I said, now we're just talking, over drinks. And I said, did you ever meet Frank Sinatra? He said, oh, yes. I said, well, God, tell me about it. I want to hear about that. I love Sinatra. Jesus Christ. He goes, well, Mr. Plym, here's how it happened. We're in the same room in the studio, and I walk up to Mr. Sinatra, and I say, oh, Mr. Sinatra, I love you. I used to watch you with all the Bobby Soxers, all the girls fawning over you, killing you. Oh, my God, you were so unbelievable. And Tiny went on and on and on. And when he got done, he goes, Mr. Plym, Mr. Sinatra looked at me, put his hand on my shoulder and said, Tiny, those were the fucking days, and walked off.
Go ahead, Dan.
Is that good?
That's a great story. Speaking of
Tiny, those were the fucking days. And just walked off.
Classic Sinatra, brother.
Classic Sinatra, baby. And Tiny laughed and laughed and laughed as he said that closing line.
That guy invented cool.
Oh, God, yeah.
Yeah. You know, speaking of, you were going kind of behind the scenes a little bit. What, obviously, you always get into the soul of a musician by their choice of music. What kind of albums, records, music, what kind of stuff did Tiny Tim listen to when he wasn't, like, what was his go-to?
Very easy question, and thank you. Only old stuff, man. He didn't like anything new at all. You know, he respected everybody.
Yeah.
Every artist, Rod Stewart, the Beatles, you know, and all that. Okay. He was into the genre of the 20s and 30s and vaudeville. Russ Columbo and all those guys.
Oh my God, here's a name. Wow.
And that's what he did on stage. To mix it in on his show, he would put in some, you know, relevant people at the time, you know what I mean? But he'd do it his own way, you know?
Sure.
Right.
But to answer your question specifically, all the old artists from the 20s and 30s, he loved them, and that's what he lived. And that's what he did on stage. Amazing. And he was wonderful at it, you know?
Now, I am curious as a music lover myself, his voice, you know, and I'll fight to the death over this. Vinyl is the best way to listen to music. His voice, something about it. It was like it was made for vinyl. I've heard him on CD. I've heard him on radio. Was that a purposeful choice, or is that just because of how good his music was that it just had that natural? Almost, you know, if that question makes any sense, like his voice seems purposefully made for vinyl.
Absolutely.
Well, I think so too, because he's an old school guy, and he fit right in, and he loved that shit.
Yeah.
You know,
he really did, Stephen.
He would tell me he loves putting the needle on the vinyl and hearing the little scratch before it started.
that I got news for you. That's all part of, to me, and my mother, when I was growing up, my mother worked for Sony, which is now Sony Records. It was called Columbia Records.
Yeah.
My mother used to press records. That's what she did.
Wow.
She actually made the vinyl.
What a history you got, pal.
Brother, she brought me bags and bags of records home. Before they hit the stores, I would get them.
Then we should be interviewing him.
I'm telling you what.
Most of the shows devolve into that anyway.
But I'll tell you something, though. But here's the thing, though. That's all part of that, listening to that needle crackle at the beginning of a record. That's all part of the listening experience. And Tiny Tim was made for that. He was born for that. You know,
yes,
and I believe that certain artists are born for certain times. You know, and he really was born for that time. You know, his age has always been in dispute. We're not going to dispute that now. It's nobody's business. Only a couple of people know the truth, and that's, you know. But
Angelo, what you just said, you're so right. Only a few people know his real age, and I don't give a shit about his birth certificate.
Yeah.
You get me?
I hear you. I hear you. Yeah. And the truth is that he was way, way ahead of his time. Before his time, he probably was an anomaly because he didn't fit in. I think, quite frankly, he, like several other musicians, artists I can name, and I think that happens from time to time, is they're literally born at the wrong time. You know, Tiny was born way, way after he should have been. He should have been born. He should have been a star in the 20s and 30s.
Exactly. He should have been in vaudeville. Can you imagine Tiny in vaudeville?
He was custom made for vaudeville.
Right.
And that's what I'm getting at. He he should have been born at a time where he could have performed in the 20s and 30s with, the Ted Healy acts and Stooges and
and Gracie Allen, Burns Show, Gracie Allen, and
right,
all those people.
Or Mae West. People forget Mae West started in vaudeville. People don't understand this. Some of the, oh my God, dude, Steven, you and I are really giving away our shit now.
But you know what? I love your show. See, you know what you're doing, my friend Angelo? You're bringing back the real essence. The essence. You and Dan the Man and Vince are bringing back the essence, I believe, of what show business was built on.
Exactly. And we've said it all along.
Yeah.
See, and Dan and I will tell you, we've told a lot of people this. We are a talk show that happens to have the subtext of wrestling. We talk very little about wrestling. We talk a lot about people, though.
Yep.
And
that's why I like your title, as we talked one time off stage, right? Your analogy, or maybe that's the wrong word, but wrestling with the future.
Yeah.
You can talk about anything.
Exactly. We've talked about that.
Any genre.
Exactly.
And in this case, we're wrestling with the future of music.
Yeah, exactly, man. Isn't it cool?
Plays off itself.
I want to tell people, and once again, I'm going to promote your book, brother, because you're going to sell some more books.
Well, that's nice. Baby needs shoes. Baby needs shoes.
It's a great book. It really is. It's a great book. The book is Tiny Tim and Mr. Plym, authored by Stephen M. Plym and Vivian Cooper. We have to say that legally because her name's on the cover.
And she's a great gal and helped me tremendously.
Yep. And with super ties to the music business, too, by the way. And Steve Plym will be with us for at least 4 episodes.
Wow.
This is episode 1. I'm thinking of making Stephen Plym a regular feature here. I'm going to have to talk to him about it and see if our budget can afford it, because our budget is a bag of chips and a Yoo-hoo.
I got to tell you something, Angelo.
Yes, sir.
No smoke up your ass. I'm a straight shooter like you are. Thank you very much for having me on this show. I love telling my story, and I love being interviewed by you and Dan the Man and your peeps, man, because you're all real.
Yeah.
You're all real cats, and I dig it.
We keep it real around here. We really do, Steve. And I'll tell you what, and I'm going to tell you what, I'm going to hook you up with Vince Russo. He is, like I said, he's a super Tiny Tim fan. He gave us an hour tonight, but Stephen, that's really not enough time to delve into Tiny Tim as a person, as a guy you knew, and we barely scratched the surface tonight. That's part of why we're going to have you back for 3 more episodes, at least 3 more. One of those episodes, I'm going to tell everybody right now, one of those episodes is going to be Management 101. It's going to be Stephen Plym. Management. Shut up, Stephen. Management 101. Stephen, you're going to learn from Stephen M. Plym what to do and what not to do in the realm of show business and personnel management.
You could also call that, Angelo, Babysitting 101.
There you go.
And Psychiatry 101, okay?
Stephen, that's a great segue, too. How much holding of the hand did you have to do with Tiny? Did you have to hold his hand a lot? Because he seemed like just a big, lovable kid. But
Literally,
like innocent.
Psychologically, look, I had so many unbelievable conversations. He's so deep, so complex, man. I ain't shitting you, right? And sometimes when he would get down, and I could tell, I used to sit and tell him, I said, Tiny, listen to me. Listen to me. He goes, I'm a failure. I'm going down. I'm not the big star I used to be. Oh my God. And all this shit, right? And I'd say, let me ask you a question. When you walk in a restaurant, and I've been with you for the years, who comes up to you, gives you the first table? Who comes up to you and kisses your butt? How many people come and surround the table and want your autograph? Do you think they do that to normal people? You're blessed. You're blessed. Look at what you have. None of us civilians have that.
Right.
You have that because you're Tiny Tim and you made an impression and a mark on people's lives and they want to touch you. They want to feel you. Hi, I watched you and Carson being married to Miss Vicky. Oh my God. Oh my God. They'd stand in line, man. When we were like at the Plaza Hotel, okay? Trump's place, right?
Yeah.
The famous Oak Room, right?
Yeah.
We'd be sitting there having drinks, right? Hoity-toity, right? When Broadway shows would get out, here's all these people, rich people, tuxes, gowns, everything, right? They're coming into the Oak Room, standing in line like children to touch him, to get his autograph, to say, and they all say the same thing, I saw you married on the Tonight Show. Oh my God, you're wonderful. Where's Miss Vicky? Blah, 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 blah. They all asked the same questions. They didn't know that, of course, but they all did. And Tiny and I used to, and when it would be over, Tiny would say, and it was so apropos, Tiny would say, Mr. Plym, isn't this unbelievable? All these rich people in tuxes after the Broadway shows come and stand in line like children to get my autograph. Yet they won't pay $20 to come to my show.
You know what? That's really interesting
he
too.
Was so right. You dig it? He had it, man. He had the handle on it. Right? They're too proud to buy a ticket to watch Tiny Tim, but boy, did they line up and want a free autograph and a picture. Hypocrites. Oh, fuck them.
That's crazy.
But Tiny got it. See, he got it.
Well, I'll tell you what, we will at this point end part 1 of Stephen M. Plym. Before we do, we will thank our sponsor, Daniel.
Yes, sir.
So let's thank our friends at Manscaped.
Well, I mean, we had a fun conversation today talking about Tiny Tim and his, I guess if you want to be at home, you can take care of your own Tiny Tim with our friends at Manscaped.com. Manscaped is the world's leading producer of Manscaped products, including now the Lawnmower 3.0, as well as their odorizers and the ball spray, which I personally love. You can use the promo code WrestlingFuture for 20% off your any purchase, 20% off for code WrestlingFuture. Manscaped.com. That's Manscaped.com and WrestlingFuture. Your balls will thank you.
Will thank you. Beautiful. Stephen Plym, thank you, my friend. You are have fast become a very close friend. You are my twin brother from a different mother. We have very interesting conversations, and I'm going to leave it at that.
Well, I got to say this in closing, guys. Dan the Man and Angelo, I want to sincerely thank you for having me here. This is a joy to talk about my book and Tiny Tim. I mean, I loved him. He was my great friend, and thank you so much for having me. And I look forward to being back on your show whenever you want me.
You will be back probably in 2 weeks.
Well,
is when you are next slated to appear.
Okay, I'm with you, baby.
Sounds good.
On behalf of Stephen Plym and Tiny Tim, on behalf of Dan the Man, I'm Angelo DeCipio. Thanks for joining us, and happy wrestling, everybody. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you, guys.